When my husband left, he didn't even close the door behind him. He just walked out, suitcase in one hand, silence in the other. The sound of that door clicking shut was small, almost gentle, but it split my world in two. We had been married for 7 years. 7 years of dreams stitched together with promises. And yet, one single word tore it all apart: infertile. The doctor said it like it was a verdict, but he treated it like a sentence he couldn't serve. For months afterward, I tried to pretend that things were fine. I smiled when he came home late. I cooked his favorite dishes even when he barely touched them. I told myself it was just a phase, that love would survive the storm. But it didn't. Love withered under the weight of disappointment and shame. The night he left, it wasn't an argument that broke us. It was emptiness. He looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger, polite, detached, done. "I can't live like this," he said quietly. Then he was gone. In our town, news traveled faster than the wind. The next morning, I became that woman. The one whose husband left her because she couldn't give him a child. The one people pitied in public and mocked in private. The one women use as an example when warning their daughters what happens when you're not enough. I stopped going out. I stopped answering calls. I couldn't stand the stares, the mixture of pity and satisfaction in their eyes. I stayed inside, surrounded by walls that still smelled of him. Every corner reminded me of what I had failed to be: a wife, a mother, a woman who fulfilled her purpose. Nights were the worst. That's when the silence grew heavy, pressing against my chest until breathing hurt. I'd lie awake, wondering how love could turn so cruel. I had given him everything: my youth, my loyalty, my body, and yet none of it mattered once I couldn't give him a child. It took months for the anger to replace the grief. But when it did, it came like fire. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror, pale skin, hollow eyes, but still alive. "Enough," I whispered. I was tired of being defined by what I couldn't have. If motherhood wouldn't come to me, I would create it. That day, I walked out of my house with trembling hands but a steady heart. I went to the adoption center. The smell of antiseptic and baby powder hit me as I stepped in. Rows of tiny cribs lined the room, and soft cries filled the air. Each small sound pierced through the emptiness I'd carried for so long. Then I saw her, a baby girl with wide eyes, staring straight at me as if she had been waiting. When I picked her up, she stopped crying. Her fingers wrapped around mine like a promise. And in that moment, the ache inside me softened. I didn't know it then, but she was the beginning of everything. As I filled out the papers, I felt a quiet strength settling inside me, not the strength of someone unbreakable, but of someone who has already been broken and survived. That night, when I brought her home, I walked past the empty chair where my husband used to sit and whispered to the air, "You left because I couldn't give you life. But I just gave life to myself." And as she slept in my arms, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost motherhood. I had just found a different path to it. People said adoption was a kind act, a noble thing. But they didn't tell me how lonely the nights could be when the baby cried and there was no one to share the exhaustion with. They didn't tell me how hard it would be to comfort a child while carrying a heart still learning to heal. The early months were chaos: sleepless nights, cold milk bottles, and endless laundry. But every morning when I saw her little face light up, something inside me healed a little more. I named her Lainey, meaning Lanicole, because that's what she was. My Lanicole after ruin. Raising Lainey was like rebuilding myself. Each time she called me mom, I remembered that family wasn't born from blood, it was built through love, through sacrifice, through persistence. I took extra shifts at the hospital, working long nights as a nurse, sometimes leaving her with my neighbor, Mrs. D'Souza, a kind widow who treated her like her own grandchild. Money was tight, but I managed. There were days I skipped meals so Lainey could have milk and fruit. I'd sit by her crib afterward, watching her sleep peacefully, feeling a pride I never felt before. It wasn't the life I planned, but it was a life I earned. When Lainey turned 5, she started asking about her father. The question came one night as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker below. "Mom, where is my papa?" The air caught in my throat. I had rehearsed answers for the soft lies, gentle truths, but none felt right. Some people, I began slowly. Aren't ready to love the way others need to be loved. She looked at me puzzled. Didn't he love you? I smiled faintly. He did, just not enough. She nodded, as if she somehow understood more than she should have at that age. Then she leaned against me and whispered, "It's okay, Mom. You have me." That night, I cried silently, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She didn't just fill my emptiness, she healed it. Years passed, and Lainey grew into a kind, curious girl. She was everything I hoped she'd be: strong, compassionate, brilliant. She brought color back into my faded world. But as she grew, so did my desire to give her something more: a sibling, a companion in the quiet years ahead. So when Lainey turned 8, I went back to the adoption center. This time, it was different. I wasn't broken or desperate. I was ready. That's when I met James. He was 6 years old, shy, and withdrawn. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was barely above a whisper. The caretaker told me his parents had abandoned him at the train station. Something about his silence pulled me in. It was the silence I once knew too well, the silence of being unwanted. When I told Lainey about him, her eyes lit up. "Can he be my brother?" she asked, barely able to contain her excitement. A few weeks later, James came home. At first, he stayed quiet, sitting in corners, watching everything but saying little. Lainey would chatter endlessly to him about school, her dolls, even the stars, and slowly, his guard began to melt. One night, as I tucked him in, he whispered, "Can I call you Ma?" My throat tightened. "Of course you can." He smiled, a small, hesitant smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. From that day, we were 3. A small family built from fractures but bound by choice. Life wasn't easy. Between my shifts and the children's needs, I barely had time to rest. The bills piled up, but every struggle felt worth it. Because for the first time, my home wasn't filled with echoes of loss, it was filled with laughter. Still, life had its cruel humor. One afternoon, as I was returning from work, a familiar voice stopped me cold. I turned and there he was. My ex-husband, Henry, older, thinner, but unmistakable. He looked at me with disbelief that quickly shifted to something else: guilt, maybe, Sage. He said softly, "You look different." "I should," I replied. "It's been years." He nodded awkwardly. "I heard you never remarried." "I didn't need to," I said. "My life's full." He looked at the 2 children playing by the park fence. "Yours?" I met his eyes. "Yes, both of them." He stared at them for a long time, perhaps trying to make sense of the life I built after he destroyed mine. Then he smiled faintly. "You always wanted kids. I'm glad you got what you wanted." "No," I said. "I got what I deserved." That night, after putting the kids to bed, I couldn't sleep. Seeing him reopened something I thought had long healed. But instead of anger, there was calm. I realized I didn't need closure. I had already written my own ending. Months passed, and fate, as it does, decided to test me again. The hospital where I worked announced layoffs. My department was hit hard. Suddenly, I was without a job, with 2 children to feed and a mortgage still hanging over me. I began searching desperately for work, any job that could keep us afloat. One morning, Lainey handed me a job listing. "Mom, they're hiring a driver at a nearby company. Maybe we can talk to them? You can drive, but maybe we can offer something." She was right. I went to that company, hoping to apply for a nursing role, but there were no openings. I left my RSUM anyway, praying for luck. Weeks later, I received a call, but not for me. They needed a driver for a senior manager's family. I didn't need one, but something about the voice on the phone made me pause. When I reached the address, my breath caught. The company's nameplate gleamed in gold: Henry & Co. Fate had led me right to his doorstep, but instead of rage, I smiled. Because he didn't know what I had been working on quietly for months: my small healthcare startup, funded by savings, small loans, and pure determination. And just as his company was struggling, mine was growing fast. In a few weeks, I'd be signing papers that would change everything, including his life, because this time, I wasn't the woman he left behind. This time, I was the woman walking through his doors with power, purpose, and 2 children who called me mom. When fate comes back around, it doesn't knock. It just waits in silence, watching if you're ready to meet its eyes. This time, a month after that unexpected encounter outside his company's gate, I walked into the same building again. But this time, not with the RSM, with a purchase agreement. My healthcare startup had been quietly expanding for over a year. It started as a small network of home nurses, then grew into a full-fledged service company. I reinvested every rupee I earned, never allowing myself comfort until I was sure Lainey and James would never know the uncertainty I lived through. Now, that same company, my company, had been invited to invest in a failing logistics branch of Henry and Co. They didn't know I was the woman behind the offer. The meeting was in a glass-walled conference room on the 15th floor. I still remember the sound of my heels echoing against the marble, steady, confident. Nothing like the frightened woman who once begged her husband not to leave her. When Henry entered, his expression froze. His eyes darted to the documents, then to me. "Sage?" he said, almost whispering. You're the investor?" I smiled calmly. "Mrs. Sage Rao, CEO of CarePlus Healthcare." "Yes." He blinked, clearly struggling to absorb it. You own CarePlus?" "Yes," I said evenly, sliding the papers across the table. "We're buying 49% of your transport division, effective immediately." He didn't speak, just sat there, staring at me like someone who'd just seen a ghost wearing a crown. The deal went through in less than 2 weeks. His company had been losing money for months. He had no choice but to sell a large stake. By the time the final paperwork was done, I was officially part owner, and with that came managerial rights. One of my first decisions was to restructure the department. New staff, new schedules, and a fresh fleet of vehicles. But most importantly, a new driver for my children, someone from their internal pool. The HR sent me a list of available drivers. I didn't even glance at the names. I just approved the one they said was most experienced. That evening, when the doorbell rang and I opened it, my breath caught. Henry stood there in a faded uniform, eyes downcast, cap in hand. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I've been assigned as the driver for your children." The world stopped for a heartbeat. For a moment, I thought fate was playing a cruel joke. But then I saw his expression, a mixture of shame, disbelief, and helplessness, and I realized this wasn't fate's cruelty. It was its symmetry. I said nothing, only stepped aside and nodded. "Come in." He entered quietly, keeping his gaze low. Lainey and James came running into the room, laughing about something from school. Henry looked up and froze. Lainey smiled brightly. "Hi, you must be our new driver." He blinked. His lips parted slightly as he stared at her. "Yes, I am," James waved cheerfully. "We have to go to practice every morning." "Will you take us, Uncle?" He nodded stiffly. "Yes, of course." I stood behind them, watching the man who once left me because I couldn't bear children now standing in front of the 2 who called me Ma. It was a moment I had dreamed of in darker times, but standing there, I felt no triumph, no anger, only an eerie calm. The days that followed were strange. Every morning, Henry arrived on time, polite and quiet. He would open the car door for the kids, avoid looking at me, and drive them safely wherever they needed to go. Sometimes, I'd watch from the balcony as he adjusted their seat belts. The same hands that once pointed at my medical reports and said, "You're broken." He didn't speak unless spoken to. But one evening, after dropping the kids home, he lingered by the gate. "Ma'am," he said quietly, I didn't know this job was for you. I didn't look up from my phone. Would you have refused if you did?" He hesitated. "Maybe." Out of shame, I finally looked at him. "Don't. Shame won't feed your family." He looked like he wanted to say more, but the words never came. He simply nodded and left. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought of the man he used to be, confident, proud, certain that motherhood was the measure of a woman. And now, he stood at my gate, working for the woman he once discarded. The irony was sharp, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction it brought. Weeks passed. Henry became part of the background rhythm of our lives. The children liked him, especially James, who said he reminded him of his old caretaker from the orphanage. I never told them who he really was. One morning, Lainey came to me with a puzzled expression. "Mom," she said, "our driver looks at you strangely sometimes. Like he knows you." I smiled faintly. Maybe I just look familiar. She shrugged and ran off to school. That evening, I caught Henry outside, sitting in the car long after his shift ended. His face was buried in his hands. "Something wrong?" I asked from the doorway. He looked up, startled. "No, ma'am, just thinking." I folded my arms. "About the past?" His silence was answer enough. Then slowly he said, "You must hate me." I didn't answer. He went on, voice trembling. "When I left you, I thought I was saving myself from a lifetime of disappointment. I didn't realize I was throwing away the only person who ever believed in me." The words hung heavy in the night air. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "I just don't think about you anymore." He nodded slowly. "That's worse." He turned to leave, then hesitated. "Those kids, they're lucky. You gave them everything I said you couldn't." I looked at him for a long moment before replying. "You were right once. I couldn't have children, but I could build a family. That's something your kind of men will never understand." He looked down, shame etched deep into his face. Then quietly he said, "You've won, Sage." I smiled faintly. "No, I've lived." Over the next few weeks, he continued his work without complaint. I paid him fairly, treated him like any other employee. But I never let the conversation drift into the past again. Then one afternoon, I received a call from HR. He had submitted his resignation. When I came home that evening, he was waiting by the gate. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," he said. "I'm leaving the city tomorrow." I nodded. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe start again. Try to be a better man, if that's still possible." I studied him for a moment. His shoulders were hunched, his eyes tired, the arrogance long gone. "Henry," I said quietly, "life has a strange way of humbling us. But don't let that turn into punishment. Learn from it." He swallowed hard. "You really forgive me?" "I forgave you the day I became a mother," I said. "That was the day your words stopped mattering." He bowed slightly, eyes glistening. "You deserved better." "Always did." And then he walked away. I watched him disappear down the lane, a shadow swallowed by dusk. For a moment, I felt an unexpected ache, not love, not regret, but the final release of something that had once consumed me. When I turned back, Lainey and James were waving from the balcony. Their laughter filled the air, warm and alive. That was my victory. Not revenge, not power, but peace. After Henry left, the house felt strangely quiet but not empty. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm, when everything has been stripped bare and the air feels clean again. For the first time in years, there was no bitterness lurking in the corners, no ghost of a failed marriage whispering in the dark. Just peace. Still, the days felt heavier at first. I'd gotten used to seeing him outside every morning, adjusting the rearview mirror, calling out to the kids, trying too hard to make himself invisible. When that small routine vanished, I realized how much space old pain can occupy, even when you think you've outgrown it. But life, as it always does, filled the silence. Lainey had her first school play that month. She was cast as a teacher, ironic, considering how much she loved pretending to scold her little brother at home. I sat in the front row, heart swelling with pride as she stood on stage, nervous and glowing. She spotted me in the audience, smiled, and mouthed, "Love you, Mom." I couldn't stop the tears. They weren't of sadness or even pride, but of recognition. In that moment, I saw myself in her. The same strength, the same fire to be seen and loved for who she was. After the performance, she ran into my arms. "Did I do well?" she asked breathlessly. "You did more than well," I said, brushing her hair back. "You were perfect." James tugged at my sari and grinned. "Mom, can I be in the next play?" I laughed. "You can be whatever you want, my love." And I meant it. They were my second chance, not just at motherhood, but at life itself. That evening, after they fell asleep, I stood by their bedroom door watching them breathe. It's strange how love grows silently, almost invisibly, until one day it fills the whole room. For years, I had thought motherhood was about giving birth, but as I watched them, I realized it was really about giving time, patience, and every fragment of yourself, even when it hurts. Sometimes, I thought of Henry, not with anger, but with an odd kind of pity. He had traded love for pride and ended up with neither. I often wondered if he had ever found peace or if he still carried the weight of what he'd done. One afternoon, months later, I got my answer. It was a Sunday. I had taken the kids out for ice cream when I saw him again standing outside a small auto repair shop in grease-stained clothes, talking to a customer. He looked thinner, older, but his posture was different, quieter, humbler. He noticed me almost instantly. Our eyes met for a moment across the road, and I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in him before: acceptance. He didn't try to approach me. He just smiled faintly, nodded once, and turned back to his work. I stood there, watching for a few seconds before walking away. That was the last time I saw him, but it was enough. Years passed. Lainey got into university on a scholarship. James, now a teenager, spent his weekends volunteering at the orphanage we'd adopted him from. They were growing into good people, kind, confident, grounded. And every time I saw them helping someone, every time they laughed without fear, I felt my heart expand a little more. One night, James came to me as I worked late in my study. "Mom," he said, hesitating at the door. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He sat down across from me. "Why did you never marry again?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at his curious face, the honesty in his eyes. "Because I already have everything I ever wanted," I said softly. "Love doesn't have to come wrapped in marriage, James. Sometimes it comes in the form of 2 children who make your life whole." He smiled, that same quiet, thoughtful smile he'd had since he was little. "Then I'm glad we found you." I reached over and squeezed his hand. "No," I said, tears threatening to spill. "I'm the one who found you." Time moved forward, as it always does. Care Plus grew beyond anything I'd imagined. We opened branches across 3 states, and I was invited to speak at a national conference about women in leadership. I walked on stage, lights blinding, applause echoing, and for a moment, all I could think about was that broken woman years ago, the one standing in front of a mirror, whispering enough, if only she could see what she had become. After the event, a young woman approached me in tears. "Ma'am," she said, "I heard your story. I'm divorced too, because I couldn't have children. But now, I feel like maybe my life isn't over." I smiled at her, recognizing the same pain, the same longing to be seen. "It's not over," I said. "It's just beginning. You don't need someone else to give your life meaning. You can write your own definition of love." She hugged me tightly before leaving, and in that embrace, I felt the circle close: the pain, the loss, the rebuilding. It had all led me here. Years later, when Lainey graduated, she gave a small speech. I didn't expect her to mention me, but halfway through, she looked directly at me and said, "My mother taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, stays, and fights for you when no one else does." She taught me that love can grow even in the ruins. Everyone clapped. I cried silently. After the ceremony, she ran up to me and hugged me tight. "I hope I make you proud," she whispered. "You already have," I said. That night, as I sat alone on the balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I thought back to everything: the betrayal, the humiliation, the nights of silent grief. And I realized something. Pain doesn't destroy you. It chisels you. It shapes you into the version of yourself you were always meant to become. People had called me barren once. They were wrong. I had nurtured dreams, built a family, created life in ways they could never understand. Motherhood wasn't in my womb. It was in my heart. And that was something no man could take from me again. Years from now, when my children tell their stories, I hope they remember this: that strength doesn't come from what you endure, but from what you choose to rise above. Because I didn't just survive being left behind, I transformed it into my greatest victory. So when people ask me now, "Don't you wish your life had gone differently?" I smile and say, No, if it had, I might never have found the kind of love that heals. And in the quiet of my heart, I whispered to the woman I once was, "You were never broken. You were just waiting to bloom."